Zoning Board of Appeals, William McCusker, Chairman. Kay Reed Clerk, William Yeomans, Member, Brian Waller, Member, Carl Parisi, Alternate, and Seth Ganesian, Alternate.
Thank you. I know it's been advertised. It was posted, correct, Katrina?
Yes, it was.
So at this point, do any of the members have any conflicts that would require them to recuse themselves from this hearing? So hearing none, at this point, I would turn, actually, yeah, why don't we just turn it over to the applicant at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Jeff Engler. I'm from the firm SEB. We are 40B Consultancy. I'm here tonight representing Fisherville Terrace, LLC, and this application. We appreciate the time to be heard. As this board knows, we appeared before the board many months ago on an informal basis to introduce the concept that we are presenting to you tonight. Since that time, we've done several things, one of which is formally submit a modification request to the existing permit, which is now almost 10 years old. Per the regulations, while the plan has not changed material in many ways, we certainly acknowledge that an increase of 28 units under the regulations would be considered a substantial change. Thus, a public hearing is required, and we're before you tonight. Over the last several months, we've submitted plans, and the town's peer review consultant, Jeff Walsh from Graves Engineering, has had the opportunity to review those plans and submitted comments today. While the plan has not changed materially since what we shared with the board several months ago, it has been several months. So if it pleases the board, I think what we'd like to do tonight is just walk the board through the site plan and the architecture at a very high level to discuss what is before you. But as the modification request indicates, yes, the density has increased from 72 units to 100 units, but effectively the overall plan has not changed. The infrastructure design, the strategy, the roadways, all of the things that get so heavily scrutinized during the normal public hearing process have really not changed. And I don't obviously pretend to speak for Graves Engineering, but I think their letter issued today indicates as much. So we're here before you hoping that we can get this permit modified so we can move forward in earnest and get this project moving forward once and for all after 10 or more years. So with that said, I'm joined tonight by Steve O'Connell, who will walk you through the engineering. John Winslow, the applicant, who's also the project architect, will discuss the units at a high level. And then we're happy to hear from both the peer review consultant and obviously the board with any questions. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Steve, and happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. For the record, is my volume okay? Okay. For the record, Steve O'Connell from Turning Point Engineering on behalf of the applicant team. So Jeff covered quite a bit, and I'm happy to get into, the exercise and the process that I went through to evaluate this modification. We evaluated the architectural units that were on the previously approved plan, and with the quantity of units in the impervious area that those units provided, we felt as though that we could achieve a better project, a more feasible project by changing the architecture and the unit layout. So they went from a combination of duplex and singles to all duplex units. And as indicated, the increase in units from 72 to 100. So it's a reduction in buildings, but an increase in units, and a very slight increase in total impervious area. The increase was about 0.6 acres. And when we run these new impervious surface and vegetative areas through our stormwater model, the result is very favorable. The stormwater infrastructure, primarily the stormwater basins that were designed and approved in the recent, current approved plan, substantially works. There's a small tweak we'll make for the 10-year storm event to satisfy, that component. Again, that sort of thing will be handled on final engineering plans should the board find this request favorable. We did come away from our informal meeting with the board, with some important assignments. The board expressed some concern about increasing units and what that means for increased parking. And I'd like to think that we're able to satisfy the board's concern. So under this scenario, for 100 units, we're providing a total of 419 parking spaces. These are all 2-car garages in which the driveways are double width. So the width of the garage. So each driveway could fit 2 vehicles. A garage, if it's as clean as mine, can fit 2 vehicles. And we have 19 what I call off-street parking spaces for a total of 419. That's a ratio of 4.2 spaces per dwelling unit, which is pretty good ratio compared to most communities' parking requirements on a residential basis. One thing I think is important to note is that with the increase in total units, there's an increase in affordable units. So the approved plan had 18 affordable units. This plan would provide 25 affordable units, which is more units the town can take credit for in their goal to achieve the 10%. So quickly touching on some engineering matters, as Jeff indicated, the layout, the topography of the roadway, all of the utilities as previously designed, reviewed in detail, and approved are identical. There's no increases in slope of the roadway or radiuses. All of the pavement of the roadway and the alignment is identical. There will be some minor storm drain piping changes as a result of the unit configuration, but those are all very minor items that just need to essentially have pipes relocate so that they don't conflict with where buildings have been relocated. One thing that's important to note as well is that the unit spacing has been substantially maintained from the approved plan. We are no closer than 15 feet at the closest point of each building. The approved plan had unit spacing about 16 or 17 feet. One of Jeff's comments, which I would like to address, just to provide some clarification. We have no intention of removing the bus shelter or the community mailbox. I apologize if the plans did not illustrate those, but there was not our intention to omit those items. So just for clarification, those features will be included with this modification. I think I'm happy to share my screen if there's a particular area of the site that raises some questions. If not, it may be beneficial to have John speak a little bit about the architecture, and we're happy to share some of the building elevations and renderings that were prepared.
That's fine.
Thank you, Steve. My name is John Winslow. I'm president of Fisherville Terrace, also president of Winslow Architects Associates. As you all know, there's a long history to this project, and I'm not going to go backwards in time too much, except to say that I saw Bill smile there. He knows that. I did not have white hair when I started this. I didn't have a froggy voice either. The architecture, I don't know if Katrina, if we're going to share the screen, I would put them up, but if not, I can just describe it very briefly. I don't know if you have them there, but or if you want to even see them, but I can just say that the architecture has remained the same as the original design of the project. It was very residential. I would call it very New England in style. As you know, the original development had both single families and duplexes, and the change is to make them all duplexes. The fundamental concept of the units are that there's two basic unit types because of the topography of this site. It's quite steeply sloping site, and the road network is laid out, of course, to work with the topography, which creates two basic conditions. You have some houses that are above the road in the sense that the topography is rising up, and then you have some units that are below the road where the topography is dropping away. And so that creates an opportunity for two basic unit types. The uphill units where the topography is going up, we have the garages underneath the unit itself. So the unit is on top of the garage. That of course makes it slightly taller, but it takes advantage of the topography and provides for more living space within the unit. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Do you have the control of the screen? Katrina, you have control, right? Or somebody put that up. I don't have control of it, but
No,
that,
I do.
Steve has control. I gave him control to share.
okay, that's fine, Steve, that's great. If you could go to the, I think it's the fourth slide. There's a site section I wanted to, there we go. Okay, this is a diagram, but it's an important diagram to understand. The site, as you see, is a sloping site. So we have the uphill units with the garages underneath the living space, and the downhill units have the garages on the main floor of the living space with a walkout basement below. So that's the basic concept. And I think, Steve, if you could go then to the last two, the rendering that you started, yeah. This is a rendering of one of the street views. And we'd like to think that we've retained a residential scale. We've worked very hard to retain residential scale. I think I'm going to stop. I'm happy to talk about the units if anybody wants to, but I'm aware that these hearings usually are all about site and site infrastructure. We'd like to think this is a handsome development, we've worked very hard to have these units working fairly close to each other. So they're of course oriented front to back, with the glazing front and back. There are sidewalks on one side of the street, as you can see on this rendering here. So I think, Steve, I'm going to turn it back to you, and unless I'm happy to talk about architecture, probably more happy than you want to hear, so I'm not going to talk about it. But Steve, I'll turn it back to you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. To be honest, I think we've probably covered everything we would expect to cover. I can't stress enough, the similarities between this modification and the approved plan, sidewalk, the curbing materials. It really is an increase in units with a slight increase in impervious, and what that results in is a feasible project. And there's one other aspect that I think that is important that folks may not realize, is that the 122 project, the Mass DOT project for the reconstruction of Main Street, is actually moving forward. I have an update from DOT that the project will go out to bid in the winter of 2021, and they expect construction to start in the spring or summer of 2021. And the reason I mention that is because, if you recall, part of the design and approval of this project was addressing some existing drainage and flooding concerns of some residents along Main Street. And this project includes the construction of a large drain pipe down Main Street, serving as a bypass, essentially as an overflow and bypass, to divert some existing stormwater that causes some flooding on an intermittent basis. And the reason it's connected to the DOT project is all about timing. One of the more costly aspects of this project was the off-site work. But since the DOT project is could potentially align really well with the construction of this project should the modification be approved. It's really a win-win. We don't have to dig up the road twice. The cost of the large drain pipe can be coordinated with the contractor awarded the DOT project. And to the extent that Grafton DPW noted that in their comment letter that we received earlier this week. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I do yield the floor, and we're happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay, thank you. So just in summary, we're talking about a decrease in number of buildings, an increase in the number of units, a small increase in impervious area. And those are really the biggies.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, as the board probably knows, and Attorney Hill certainly, that all the other parts of the permit that were issued are still relevant. We're only asking for modifications to what's been, presented, but all the other conditions that were enumerated in that permit still apply. So I think it's important because not all the members here obviously sat on that case. So they should rest assured that there's lots of things that the applicant needs to do here to satisfy various departments in the town.
Thank you, Mr. Engler. So at this point, before I open it up to questions or comments from the board, I'd like to put Attorney Hill on the spot for just a minute. And if you could maybe just kind of recap for the board our role at this point. Okay, so, really high level, why are we here and what are we supposed to do now? And I just want to set the stage for the members, particularly those who haven't been through a whole bunch of these like some of us have, so they understand what our role right now is in this process.
Sure. It's very much like a request to amend a special permit or other zoning decisions. This is essentially a request to amend the comprehensive permit that's already been issued. In terms of burdens of proof, usually these amendments come about because the original project turned out to be too difficult to put on. Often the case is that the original project ended up not being economically viable, and so the applicant would come back and propose more units typically to make a project economically viable. That's a question I would ask the applicant tonight, and they can explain that. But that sounds like what's happening here. And so if that's the case, the standard that the board can apply is, do these changes, are these changes in the public interest? Number one, are there any, just like any other 40B application, you're going to consider local needs, and you're going to consider whether there's any environmental, public health, public safety impacts that this modification would present, and then you would weigh that against the need for affordable housing. And so if there's an appeal from a modification decision, the burden of proof is still on the applicant to prove that they need this modification to make the project work economically. And the burden is a little bit tortured in the way it's phrased, but it's essentially that the modified project is less uneconomic than the original project, and it's a double negative, but purposely so. So the applicant might tell you tonight that the current project as approved is uneconomic, and under the state threshold, a developer has to make a minimum amount of profit, and the applicant could say, well, this is below that threshold, but with this change, it's significantly better than it was under the original project. So it's up to the board, but one thing you can ask the applicant is for an explanation for why this project is better economically than the project that was approved. But again, your primary focus here is to look at the impacts of the modification, just like you would for any other 40B application. You'd look at the impacts of what kind of issues are presented by the additional units and by changes in the design of the project. And then again, you weigh those, whatever impacts there may be, maybe there's none, but whatever the impacts are, you'd weigh that against the need for affordable housing. And as part of that, you look at the economics of the project.
Thank you. So with that in mind, any questions or comments from the board? Mr. Yeomans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get into my comments, I have a couple of questions. One question of Steve. You mentioned the DPW rather, on 122 Main Street, that it goes out to bid in 2021. Is that correct?
Yes, Bill. Yes, and that, Mr. Yeomans, that is through the Mass DOT projects program. It's
Katrina, if I might, you had sent out a document from Paul Canoyer that led me to believe it was going to start next spring. Am I wrong on that? Did I miss?
All I know is the comments from
Paul
Paul
Canoyer.
that the project is scheduled to begin late spring or early summer. When they put it out to bid, I have no idea. All I know is that it's due to start sometime late spring, summer of next year. So that they
Right.
could be putting it out to bid. You know, they only give so much of a window to bid. I don't know. I don't know when it's going out to bid because that's through the state, not through us.
Right, that seems to be in conflict with your statement, Steve, that Paul Canoyer put out that statement that the work was going to be done, it would go out to bid, and the work was going to be done next spring. And that was his caution in his letter to the board. So that's something that I think should be clarified, but I certainly understand the point. I have a few questions and a few thoughts on this.
Can I respond to that one first, Bill? Because that one's
Yes,
easy.
please. Yes.
Paul's letter says that the project is expected to start next spring, and I said the spring of 2021. So that's the same time.
Okay, so that would be going out to bid at that time.
It's going to go out to bid in the winter. So, the winter really coming up.
Right.
And then next spring, construction will start.
Right, that was my understanding. I thought you had mentioned that the bid was going to go out in 2021. So the work is planned to be started next spring, in the spring of 2021 in the summer.
Yeah, 2021 is right around the corner, unfortunately. Well,
Right.
maybe fortunately, right, for every.
Thank you. Just a few comments, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
And I spent quite a bit of time these past quite a few days looking at the original decision, looking at the one that was written, and just kind of trying to understand this better. In 2010, there were 12 hearings were held dealing with the specifics of this 40B project. And at that time, Chairman McCusker is the only member of the board who was serving on the ZBA at that time, who has the greatest, I think, depth of understanding of this project. Fortunately, Bill was there then, and he's still here now. As it's been stated, it's a 25-acre, mostly wooded site, some unaffected wetlands, but my understanding of it in looking at the notes relative to the meetings and the findings in the decision, it has very acute topography and soil characteristics that had to be dealt with in its development. And as it's been previously stated, the topography drops from about 450 feet at the top side, the Sutton line, to 334th Street and Main Street, a change in elevation of 116 feet. And obviously, that's a slope that has to be dealt with very carefully relative to water. Much hearing time was spent dealing with the cuts and fills required due to the slope, and the specific plans to deal with the soils, the groundwater issues, the impervious surfaces, and runoff resulting from the development of the site. As it was stated, the original decision was for 42 42 single-family and 30 units and 15 duplex buildings. In the decision, it was noted that originally it started out with 72 single-family homes, as I understand it. And the decision actually mentioned that the planning and density section A, number 8, stated that the plan for single-family homes and duplexes offered greater diversity than only offering single-family homes. This seems to be a trend going back completely to taking away some of that diversity, and now we have all duplexes, and the project started out as all single-family homes. So I think that's a point to be considered. In the section 4, finding of facts, page 5, section B, stormwater management. There are 19 very specific statements in this section dealing with addressing the stormwater concerns of this particular site. The applicant was required to bring in a hydrology expert, and I'm not going to bore everyone with all of the 19 specifics, but in reading through all of that, the hydrology it's very poor soil conditions and bedrock on this sloped site. And the comment was made relative to that hydrology report, poor soil and bedrock. And a quote from Graves Engineering is again reiterating that poor infiltration capacity of soils on site. And I just ask that all of my fellow board members read in detail that section and look at the thoughts that provoked all of the engineering work on this site dealing with water. I have one question, again, an additional question of Steve. You mentioned impervious surfaces. The new plans show an increase in the total impervious surface on a site that had serious issues in stormwater runoff concerns to accommodate the original plan for 72 units. And I just want to clarify a question I have in my mind. On 6/3, a letter was sent from you, Steve, to Chairman McCusker. And in that letter, you point out the total impervious surface is 5.89 acres. And with the proposed modifications, it comes to 7.2 acres. And that's almost a 28% increase in impervious surface conditions. In another letter from Jeff Engler to you, Mr. Chairman, dated August 17th, that particular letter points out that the impervious areas within the developed portion of the site will be increased from 5.9 acres to 6.5 acres. That's a difference. That one creates a 10.2% increase in impervious surface conditions. Where's which one is right? And and why, what changed from June 3rd? And I look at the box on the bottom of that letter, Steve, that you sent to Chairman McCusker. I mean, there's a big difference between the one coming on August 17th from Jeff Engler, citing 5.9 acres to 6.5. And I think that's the change in impervious surface that you've mentioned. But I'd like to have that really clarified, and not, I'd like to know what created those two and created that discrepancy, because I would want a peer review of the site conditions and the calculations regarding the stormwater and impervious surface calculations before I would even consider voting on this perceived change. And I guess I'm just going to summarize, Mr. Chairman, my comments. During the past 10 years, this 40B project has failed to get off the ground. the ZBA, the decision affords 3 years for the developer to get the project started and to implement the project. The board has granted 7 extensions over this past 10 years, over the past 7 years, actually, allowing it to go forward. I really feel that it's coming in now, and to make the numbers work, we're being asked to approve a new plan for 100 units, an increase of 39%, or 28 housing units, an increase in 7 affordable units, which is great. But I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wait a minute, they spent a year looking at this site and really being critical of the groundwater and the runoff on the site. And all of a sudden, the numbers don't work. So let's throw in another 28 housing units and we can make the numbers work. And I feel like I'm being asked to help make a very desperate project work financially when over the past 10 years, no one apparently was interested in becoming a partner in developing this project and building it out. And yet, during the same time, the town of Grafton evolved from the doldrums of 2010 into a very robust and new building phase for all types of housing, including 40Bs, leading to the present day building boom. So in closing, I have very serious concerns with the viability and the benefits of this new proposal before us. And I ask that my fellow board members to carefully evaluate as well as I've done over this past week. And I'm sitting here saying, it's like I'm approving another 40B project, and I'm going by, somebody saying that everything's going to be okay. We spent a year assessing the viability of this project and the concerns with water. And I'll close on that statement. Thank you, Bill.
I think I just want to comment that one of the last things you said, we're being asked to approve like a new 40B. Well, fortunately, we're not actually, and we don't have to go through that whole process all over again. And you're right, there was a lot of concern about the, I'm just going to say the drainage on the site. And there was a tremendous focus put on that, as you said. Obviously, I don't recall the detail that you cited, but let's be really honest here. I mean, they could actually have just walked away and then come back with a brand new project of 100 units and 50 buildings, or whatever it is. So, fortunately, they're not. It's still a piece of land, and it's still eligible to be developed under 40B. So to some extent, Bill, you're right. It is a new project, but fortunately, a lot of it's exactly the same, so we don't have to go through that whole process again. I don't know, does the applicant care to respond to any of what was said there?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and I appreciate Mr. Yeoman's diligence going through the permit, but yes, Mr. Chairman, you were there, you lived it. We were put through the ringer over 12 hearings and went through hydrology and stormwater management. And Mr. Walsh was meticulous in his review of this project, and the conditions in the permit satisfied the board, obviously because a permit was issued. So I don't think we need to revisit all of those issues because we're not asking for any changes in any of those things. Moreover, Mr. Yeomans, you do have peer review. That's what Mr. Walsh has been up to the last 3 weeks. And his letter issued today, I don't speak for him, I'm sure he'll speak at some point, indicates that he's comfortable from a civil engineering standpoint of what has been proposed. So this project undoubtedly has a long history. And I do a lot of 40B consulting, but I'm also a developer. And I know the infrastructure costs of this project are disproportionate to the number of units and the site work and whatnot. That's just the nature. It's not the town's fault. It's not the developer's fault. It's just what it is. And the additional units make this project financially viable. Do we want to get into a whole economic and uneconomic debate? We don't want to, but we will have no problem showing that this project, the old project, and to even an extent this project, is barely financially viable. But we have a developer that's partnering with the applicant that's going to make this go forward. And we simply would ask the town, recognizing, as Mr. McCusker said, a lot of time and effort and peer review has gone into this. It was approved. We're not coming before the board with a totally new application. And we would like to create a beautiful community here. And none of the things that were a concern there have changed: hydrology, stormwater management. So I think it's important to know we're not starting from scratch. There was a reason there were 12 hearings. All of those details were vetted, and we're not asking the board to change any of that stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Engler. I'm just going to add in, Mr. Winslow's come to us however many times it was asking for extensions, and I've always been very strongly in favor of granting the extensions. And one of the reasons I was so strongly in favor of granting extensions is a little selfish in so much as we put a heck of a lot of work into it. And I don't know why this particular project I felt that way, but I did. Because we've had other projects that actually went through longer hearing processes. But more importantly, a number of neighbors came to the hearings. I'm surprised they're not here now. Perhaps they're listening on TV. A number of neighbors came to these hearings, and there was a few that spoke quite strongly of water flowing off of this parcel and creating problems with flooding in yards and things along those lines. And my feeling at the end of the process was that when this gets built, they were actually going to really be improving the water flow, the surface water and drainage issues associated with this hill, which is what it is, for those neighbors. So, they're obviously they're building a bunch of houses, but they're also going to make things better for the neighbors with respect to a lot of flooding and things like that were a lot of complaints about. So that's one of the reasons I've been, strongly in favor of granting the extensions. The other thing I'll say to what Mr. Engler was saying, at some point we're going to need to see the numbers, and somebody's going to have to just, show us that, it was not viable before, and this is what it's going to take now to make it viable. I think we're definitely going to have to see those at some point. It would be, it wouldn't be right for us to not see it. So that's, to the rest of the board, we'll get there. We're going to have to see those at some point. So other questions or comments from the board, please. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The concern that I have is 28 more units this project is going to bring in. That means roughly, a family of 4, if you're talking about family of 4, that's like 400 people, 100 units, thinking about the vehicles, about 200, somewhere between 200 to 250 vehicles, considering teenagers and all that. I'll get to the point. There's only one entrance and one exit for this proposed project. But in the GIS, when I look at parcel 150, there's a small space in between parcel 144 and 142. Would that be another exit? Or, is that it's not shown in any one of the map that I see here. But if you go to GIS, you can see what I'm talking about. I don't know whether Katrina can put the parcel 150 up for us.
Respectfully, sir, the entrance is not changing, and we can't acquire other parcels. And this plan was vetted by the fire department and the town's traffic peer review engineer and found to be safe on all fronts. So we're not changing anything about the plan other than adding 28 units. And I would bet my professional reputation that the same peer reviewer would say the addition of that many units is immaterial to the findings and conclusions of the previous study.
Yeah, my only concern
So
is
with that being said, hang on a second, Steve. With that being said, please let's direct conversation through the chair.
Apologies.
And you know, to Seth's point, you know, what you're bringing up is an excellent point, Seth, right? And I don't remember the details from 10 years ago, but the idea of a second entrance or exit and, you know, the ramifications of having just one, you know, I can assure you were, you know, discussed extensively. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that we've kind of been through that, but, you know, we you know, this is what we end up coming up with. So go ahead, continue with what you're saying.
Yeah. My thinking is all about safety of the people. 400 people are going to live there. I mean, my rough estimate in that complex. So what if there is an accident right in front of, I mean, right near the main street and the entrance of this proposed project? Say, you know, a major accident, and it takes about 2 hours for the officials to clear the, you know, vehicles or, you know, to clear the mess. So for 2 hours, you know, are the people going to sit in this complex, not do anything? I mean, what if somebody gets a heart attack and want to, you know, immediately take into the hospital, or, you know, or for any other medical needs, if people want to, you know, head out to the main street, how they are going to do it? I mean, that's my thought on that. I have a couple of other questions. I don't know whether
Steve, just so you understand, one thing we do, you know, one thing that's here is a double wide road, a double barrel road, all the way up to the point where it splits. And that's done intentionally in these situations to try to create less risk of a completely blocked road, as you just described. You know, sure, there could be some sort of a very major accident that blocks the entire road, but that's the intention of the double barrel road that you see there, essentially, you know, a double wide road to try to minimize that risk. You know, in our role as a ZBA, we're kind of the clearinghouse for all town departments. And I'll just note that, you know, the police chief and the fire chief, neither one, well, actually, we don't have comments from the fire chief, but I think somehow maybe the communication was to Katrina, but neither one of them had a problem with this either. So, you know, personally, I tend to defer to those experts when it comes to those public safety experts, and you know, neither of them had anything to say about that concern. So I'll just point that out to you. But go ahead, continue, please.
My second point is, observation is, you know, let me see. There's a water boost, proposed water booster station. That's, I don't know how much noise that'll, I don't know what it does. I don't know whether it'll create more noise because this parcel 150 is in between to R20. I mean, it's in between. Let me quickly check here. Couldn't see. It's in between parcel 152 and 149. The entrance is in between 152 and 149. Probably, you know, if the proposed water booster station, if it's going to create noise, it could be a problem for the parcel owner.
Mr. O'Connell, you care to explain what that is? Steve will let the engineer explain what that is, perhaps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the water booster station is necessary because of the elevation of the top of the site. It's necessary to provide adequate pressure for domestic water and fire flows. There are a number of water booster stations around town. We've consulted with the water department. There's actually a booster station nearby on Ferry Street. They're very common. They're in enclosed buildings that meet the specifications of the water department. And I have not found a water booster station that is a nuisance from a noise standpoint. So I can appreciate the comment, but I just don't know how applicable it is here.
And my third Mr. Chairman, I have one more observation that I'm looking at the map C, the sheet number C 3.1. I am looking at parcel 137 and parcel 140. And there's a proposed retaining wall. And the retaining wall covers 3/4 of the parcel 137. And let me see this. The proposed retaining wall for parcel 140 covers pretty much everything. I mean, covers even a little bit more for. I mean, it covers a little bit on 142 for parcel 142 as well. Just wondering why it covers only 3/4 for parcel 137, but it covers pretty much, the entire lot for 140. I mean, any particular reason why it's designed that way?
Mr. O'Connell?
Thank you. So if I know the members weren't part of the original approval back in 2010, but the retaining wall back in 2010 was probably twice as long. And then in the 2019 final engineering plans that were reviewed in great detail as well before they were considered final and approved by the board and endorsed by the board, we're able to significantly reduce the length of that retaining wall from some regrading and road redesign exercises, which made drastic improvements to the cuts and fills. So the need for the retaining walls is to prevent the proposed earthwork from going off of the project site onto privately owned abutting property. It's just a result of the existing topographic conditions combined with the proposed topographic conditions. We would love it if there was no walls, because walls on this site are adding to the economic challenges. But they are where they are because that's where they're needed to accommodate the proposed grading for the project. Does that help?
I'm going to add, Cease, that you're kind of looking at sheet C-3.1 and trying to align the retaining walls with the lot lines of lot 137 and 140. But unfortunately, the lot lines don't always go along with the contours of the land. So I think really what you want to look at is sheet C5.1, where you can see the contours of the land. And looking at the contours becomes a little bit clearer as to why that retaining wall goes about 2/3 the length of parcel 137, but it has to do all of and more of 140. Other comments? You have anything else, Steve?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Other comments or questions from the board? Quiet. I can't see everyone. Is anyone trying to get my attention? There we go. Now I can see everyone.
I have a few comments, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Parisi.
I actually want to congratulate the engineering team. I mean, we were here 6 months ago, and at that time, I believe the distance between buildings were about 10 to 15 feet. So you increase that up to 16 to 17 feet. So that's a major thing for a major success for the people who are going to be buying these units or renting these units. I appreciate Mr. Yeoman's comments, but I also concur with Mr. Walsh's final review that he is satisfied with the hydrology calculations. I do understand that this is based on the 10-year runoff, storm runoff. So I believe if he is satisfied, I think I'm going to be satisfied as well. I'm happy that you're going to reinstate the bus stop. I think it's a plus for this little community. And also, it certainly is going to be very, very beneficial going from 18 units to 25 units that are going to be affordable. So it's going to basically give another 7 families the chance to own an affordable unit. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you raised the concern about the neighbors and the water issue that they're having right now. And I am sure that the engineering staff has looked over. And as you said, I feel comfortable that by the end of this project will be done, it's going to benefit the neighbors as well. So it's probably going to take away some of their water issues. And in final, I want to finally conclude this saying that, the retaining walls are a must, I believe. There's such a difference in elevation that this will proactively stop probably future erosion of the land. So I like the plans. Actually, I think they're well done. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Other board members have any comments or questions? At this time, I'd ask Mr. Walsh to speak. I think we've maybe taken some of the wind from your sails and covered some stuff, but why don't you do your thing?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Board members, everyone else, good evening. For the record, my name is Jeff Walsh. I'm with Graves Engineering. I'm the peer review consultant for the Grafton Zoning Board of Appeals. And likewise, we work for a number of other boards in Grafton. I too sat in through the marathon sessions back 10 plus years ago. If I was lucky, I didn't get to every single one of the 12. I would like to speak to for a minute, Mr. Chairman, about some of the history of the stormwater management scenarios that were floated during that time, 10 or 12 years ago. And let me, before I get into that, let me jump forward and let Mr. Yeomans and the others know, yes, I did review the hydrology that was submitted as part of this amendment application. I did look at the changes in impervious area. I did look at the hydrology as it compared back to what was developed by way of the construction plans some year and a half ago. And I might add that those construction plans were a huge improvement compared to the preliminary plans that were the basis for which these construction plans were finally developed. As far as the recent review with the hydrology, there was a discrepancy Mr. Yeomans brought up about the 2 sources of information. I was privy to only one source of information, but nevertheless, let me share with you my findings. The source of information from SEB Consultants, Mr. Engler, spoke to 0.6 acres. Well, this afternoon I did a simple analysis of the impervious associated with the dwelling units and the driveways of the former application, the mix of duplexes and single families. Set that number aside, and I looked at the amount of impervious associated with these 100 duplex units in their driveways, and I come to 0.6 acres. But through my review of the hydrology, I saw that the net increase in impervious area in the hydrology was greater than that 0.6 acres. That was a conservative approach by the design engineer, and certainly not something I want to take exception to, because it was in fact a conservative approach where there was an increase of more than 0.6 acres in the latest hydrology. So that's a discrepancy that I saw today that is consistent with what I understand from Mr. Yeoman's presentation earlier this evening, but nevertheless, the hydrology does support this 0.6 acres of increased impervious shown on the plans. If I may now get back to the history. Oh boy, that was painful. Back then, the hydrology that was first presented, and you will see it even in the hydrology that was presented with this amendment, there's an analysis point taken behind each of the abutting down gradient properties in the hydrology model. I don't expect you guys to read it, but nevertheless, it's there. I did read it. Back with the original presentation, the intention to manage stormwater on the site after it was to use, I forget, probably numerous small impoundments, but nevertheless, water was proposed to be discharged at the upgradient side of each of these abutting properties by way of level spreaders. And the hydrology analysis looked at each individual lot in the pre versus post peak development rates to each abutting parcel for that purpose. That's why the model was so intensive. The hydrology model was so intensive. Nevertheless, the concept of the level spreaders to each of the abutting properties was not looked upon favorably at all. And the next iteration, if you will, by the previous engineer, it wasn't Andrew's survey and it wasn't Turning Point Engineering, but the next iteration by the engineer of record back then was to provide 100% on-site infiltration of all stormwater so that no stormwater would leave the site. And that's when the hydrologists come out and geohydrologists got involved and so forth. And that too, that scenario eventually fell by the wayside. The soils at the site just don't support 100% infiltration. And the stormwater scenario that was the final consideration and approved, the concept was a series of more centralized stormwater basins, store it, detain it, infiltrate where you can to the extent you can, but as we all know, that's limited on the site. And to overflow the water following the drainage paths that they currently exist, which for one part is the brook to the west of the site, the downstream of, on the other side of Main Street has flooding issues. When the dust settled on that hydrology, there was the proposal to improve the drainage along Main Street that was talked about earlier tonight for the purpose of alleviating the flooding across the street due to blockages and subsurface features associated with that brook, and to receive runoff from the entrance of the project that's piped down after it comes out of the stormwater basins. So I apologize for the long history on this, but that's why there's so much information in the file from 10 or 12 years ago. Coming forward to this plan, again, about a year ago, we went through a very detailed review where the preliminary plans of 12 years ago were brought forward to construction-ready plans. Very thorough design work, very thorough review and vetting by the board and others. And that's what was endorsed. And these plans are a modification of the plans from a year and a half ago. So with respect to that, I looked at the changes to these plans. I already told you about my review of the hydrology and the impervious areas. I looked for features and so forth, and Mr. O'Connell pointed out that they had no intention to remove a few amenities, which I understand were proposed toward the latter part of the construction plan review. But nevertheless, they're not going away, so that's good to hear. And yes, I did recognize the increase of a few more parking spaces for that off-street parking. And I think that's about it, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I need to speak to anything else in my review letter. I think we've touched upon those issues, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Walsh from the board? We're rather quiet today. All right, so as far as I can tell, is the one participant here, Mr. Baraja, and I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly. I do see that he had a question in chat, and I do want to bring that question. I don't think that Katrina answered it, but
he wanted to see the full layout of the plans, which is why I put them up on the screen. And I asked him if he
not
had
that
seen,
one.
Not that one? Oh, the
No,
other one he had asked?
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to it now.
Were the approvals for this project made 10 years ago? Have the approvals from water and traffic been renewed with the new population of the town of Grafton after 10 years?
So Mr. Barrage is asking, and I think it's a legitimate question, right? So not so much water. I would imagine that the water department is somebody's checked with the water department, and the ability to have water on the site is still valid, or you wouldn't be.
I gave everything to Steve, and he was going to review it. Steve Lemoyne, and I haven't heard back, but he did get a full set of the revised plans.
Yeah, I would think the developer would cover that as well, because he kind of becomes a showstopper. But traffic, the new population in the town after 10 years, population has changed. We're increasing the number of people living in this development. Should we be, or why shouldn't we be doing a new traffic study, or, has the, why isn't a traffic study involved here? It doesn't need to be involved, or, I think that's a very legitimate question that should be answered. I'm not sure who would answer that.
I can answer that, Mr. Chairman. Nothing has changed from a traffic safety standpoint. We've added units. The entrance is identical to the entrance that was approved by the town. The sight lines are identical to what was approved by the zoning board. So nothing from a traffic safety standpoint. If it would make the board feel better to see about the changes in volume, could we ask for an update? We could provide that. But relative to the showstoppers, as it relates to ZBA approvals, this plan is identical to what was already approved.
Yeah, I don't think the citizen was asking so much about sightlines as he specifically in his question, mentioned population, and of course there'll be more traffic generated, more trips generated. So I think that's really the issue. And I kind of wonder, maybe the question goes to Dan. I mean, is a traffic study from 10 years ago still valid? I mean, should we be requesting a new or an updated study? I don't know. I mean, I think I've been pretty vocal. Certainly some people on the board know my opinion of traffic studies. Mr. Engler, you probably even heard me say it, but nonetheless, it is part of the process. So, I mean, should we be getting something different?
So, Mr. Chairman, I do have some opinions on this. I think I would depart a little bit from Jeff's perspective on there being nothing changed. Certainly, Grafton has changed in the last 10 years, and there may be more traffic on Main Street. There may be less traffic. The board doesn't know. The board wouldn't necessarily know if sightlines have changed or not. For Jeff to say categorically that they haven't changed, how would we know that unless we actually went out there and looked at the abutting properties? This project driveway is actually relatively narrow, and when you have a narrow driveway area, you tend to have potential challenges with sight distances. So there may actually be a worse available sight distances today than there were in 2010. We don't know, and I think those are legitimate questions that the board should ask and to look at. Some of those issues Jeff Walsh can look at. You can also have a separate traffic engineer look at some of these issues. I don't think there needs to be a full-blown traffic study and a full-blown review, but that's up to the board. You could request that. I think these are all legitimate areas of inquiry. With respect to water and sewer, same thing. I mean, I think the board should make sure that the project site still has adequate or available water pressure and sewer capacity.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. I mean, neighbors could have new hedgerows or trees are 10 years older and 10 years bigger. And, it seems to me it probably makes sense to have the traffic study that was done at the time updated. The way these things usually fall out is, it doesn't really matter how much more the volume increases, you still end up with the same level of service for these intersections. And, so it really doesn't matter. A traffic engineer could probably come in here and basically something along the lines of, even if the trip counts on Main Street have doubled, we'll still end up with the same level of service for, for this intersection. But I think we should do that. I think we should have that information to make sure. I think we owe it to the town as part of our responsibilities to have that taken, get that information, because we are adding, a number of units, a number of people, a number of trips to the site. So I think that's something that we should request.
Your level of service may change.
It could.
28 units is not a lot, obviously, but if this intersection was already at level C or D under the 72 unit plan, I mean, it's possible that adding 28 more units that moves it into F range. But again, that's something for a traffic engineer to opine on. And again, that if traffic is heavier on Main Street than it was 10 years ago, even at 72 units, it might be a worse level of service than it was 10 years ago. So I think those are all legitimate points of inquiry. And I think given that we're talking about a significant increase in units, I think that's a reasonable request.
Thank you. Let me just go to the Q&A.
Can I ask a question? So you're asking us to update both the sight line and the level of service?
Yeah, Jeff, I think a traffic study was presented 10 years ago. I assume, well, maybe you don't have access to it. I assume we have a copy of it. But I think that needs to be updated for, for 2020 at this point, for the new volume of units and, and the new site conditions that may or may not have changed since 2010 when this was, first proposed. I guess I have mixed feelings. I don't think I'm at the point where I'm saying, they need to do traffic counts. I'm not so sure even if they did traffic counts today with the current state of the pandemic and, half the kids not in school and all that sort of stuff, we're even going to get legitimate traffic counts. So I don't know that traffic counts need to be done, but, it sure would be nice to at least have the new, volume of trips coming out of the site, applied to the, the traffic study that was done in the past. I mean, if others feel differently about that, please speak up. That's my feeling on it.
Bill, but just so you know about traffic counts, and maybe you already know this, but for the applicant to actually get new traffic count data on Main Street at this intersection is actually quite easy. The cost is roughly $300, and they hire a company, they go out there, they put speed tubes down the road, and it's an automatic data collector for 2 days. So I think that's worthwhile doing personally, because I think it gives you a data point. But like you said, the data point may not be super accurate in terms of future conditions, given that we're in a state of
Mr. Chairman,
lower traffic.
I think I know what you guys are asking for, and we will endeavor to provide an updated analysis.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd gone back to the Q&A. Just wanted to make sure. All right, so nothing else in the Q&A. I don't see any indication that anyone else wants to speak. I don't know if Mr. Barajo wants to actually speak. Mr. Yeomans wants to speak. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question that I had highlighted, and it's to Jeff.
Jeff Walsh?
Yes, excuse me, yes. Regarding stormwater. In the paragraph 19, there's a couple of statements there. And all of the previous points made, deal with the soil conditions and what was found in the hydrology report, et cetera. And I'm curious with this statement. Graves has advised the board that the applicant has addressed all the major design concerns that affected the viability of the stormwater management system, but noting that the preliminary drainage calculations had not yet demonstrated conclusively that peak runoff rates could be attenuated, maintained at pre-development levels. I assume that the plan that's put in place has dealt with that. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Yeomans. And to the point of that comment, I don't recall which plan iteration back from 10 years ago that applied to, but nevertheless, like you pointed out, hydrology was a major concern back then.
And on the final point in the stormwater, talk about hydrology. It's not an exact science, and modeling assumptions do not always match actual conditions post-development. On a site with poor soil conditions and inconsistent subsurface geology, post-development hydrologic conditions are more difficult to predict. On this site, the substantial cuts and fills needed to construct the roadway could potentially intercept groundwater. Groundwater depth could not be determined with certainty in all locations of the proposed runoff infiltration. And this last statement, and the ZBA, and this is the original decision, in the ZBA remains very concerned that even with the applicant's best good faith efforts to design a stormwater system that prevents off-site flooding, the post-development hydrology conditions of the site may be different than what has been predicted, and the proposed system could be inadequate to properly manage runoff. The last sentence.
So Bill, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
What are you reading right now?
I'm reading from the decision.
What page?
Page number 7. At the top of the page, it's page number 6, it's point number 19. And then it goes over to page number 7. And my question is, based on that statement.
Hang on. Katrina, do you have the ability to put that on a screen? You're muted.
Yep, give me a sec, I'll get it up.
I mean, I've got it right in front of me. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, I put sharing on everybody.
There it is. All right, so you're talking about this paragraph here, Bill?
Yes, if you go down to the end of the question I have is right at the end of that paragraph. It says this risk can be controlled and mitigated through conditions to the comprehensive permit. So what the statement is saying that based on poor soil conditions and the number of cuts, that they couldn't really determine the groundwater levels. So I guess my question, Bill, is, Mr. Chairman, is this: are there conditions that have been placed on this that have dealt with the statement here that the ZBA remains very concerned that even with the best efforts, I guess what I'm looking at there is that let's assume that this goes forward and there's a 10% increase in the impervious surface based on the 0.6 increase that Jeff stated, both Jeffs have stated. And the question is there anything else that can be done? Is there anything else in this permit that would deal with a condition that when this is built, that the post-development water flow off of this property is far greater than the pre-development, based on the fact that it's poor soil conditions and inconsistent surface, subsurface geology, et cetera. And saying that that's difficult to predict. As I read this, I said, is there some other condition in there that says, engineering-wise, if the post runoff does not meet the design, can something else be done? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, Bill, I think what you're asking is if the runoff is greater than the post is greater than the pre, what do we do? I think is almost what you're saying, right? I mean,
yeah, and again, I've kind of focused on the 10% increase, and I'll accept that, that it's a 10% rather than the 28%, which would be based on the first letter. But so, considering the fact that there's an increase in impervious surfaces on this site, there are uncertainties relative to the soil and what is done down the road for the people on Main Street and I acknowledge that they've done a lot of design work on the street to deal with it. I just don't know what that
Jeff,
means.
Mr. Walsh, do you have any comment on that?
Well, I keep trying to scroll up on the screen to read the page before, but I can't do it. Nevertheless, stormwater, like I said, there was a lot of stormwater work that went into finally coming to the point where a decision could be rendered back then. That I recall. I can't speak to creating the decision, but I can speak to the stormwater work that was done. There was just, well, I talked through the two scenarios that came and went before they got to the final scenario.
I may be able to shed some light, Mr. Chairman. I think I know where Mr. Yeomans is confused.
Well,
if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I've been working with the Grafton Zoning Board for a number of years on a couple different projects. And, since Mr. Yeomans has been on the ZBA and involved with 40Bs, they've all been very thoroughly engineered and vetted prior to the issuance of a decision, and a vote of approval by the board. But in the case of this original Fisherville project in 2010, the board approved a fairly preliminary plan, especially based on their standards and criteria of today, of the last several years. And I found that to be the case with 40B projects a decade ago, but most communities are requiring applicants to provide much more information nowadays. So I think Mr. Yeomans might not realize that the plan that was approved with all of these conditions in 2010 was a fairly preliminary plan. And all of these conditions really resulted in a new engineered plan. It had the same number of units, all the conditions had to be met, but the hydrology design changed drastically. The plan that was part of the approval in 2010 had a stormwater basin at the bottom of the hill, not too far away from Main Street. And if I recall correctly, it had like over a 15-foot cut into bedrock. So there were a lot of aspects about that design that just weren't practical, which led to all of the conditions that Mr. Yeomans is seeing in this permit. But because the permit was issued with all these conditions, it had to be met. And in order to meet them, a new engineered plan was provided to the board. And that was reviewed by Graves and reviewed by the board. And that had a number of meetings, probably about a half a dozen meetings. Until the board was satisfied, along with Jeff from Graves, that all these conditions had been met. But I think Mr. Yeomans just doesn't have the benefit of that history. If he could see that original plan, which was, like I said, very preliminary, he would see the drastic improvements that the approved plan proposed and provided, and how those are identical essentially to today, and why they're still valid and acceptable and do provide an improvement to the overall area from a hydrologic standpoint. Hope that maybe fills in some gaps.
Actually, no, it did fill in a gap. I quite frankly had forgotten about that intermediate point where we did, there was changes. The other thing I want to point out to Mr. Yeomans is, what we're looking at here, number 19, is the 19th finding of fact. So, and I think there's probably more after that. So the beginning of our decision or the permit lists off a whole number of finding of fact. And part of what we're doing in these findings of fact is setting up the conditions and the eventual granting of the permit. And I think that's really what's being said here is, despite all of our best efforts at the time, we're still really not sure we've got, what we need, or the engineers aren't sure they've got what they need in place to do, to do the drainage properly. And therefore, we're going to put a bunch of conditions on this permit to help make sure that happens. And, I'm sure I think Dan's the one who wrote this. I'm sure what he's doing in these words here is basically setting it up so that should this go under appeal, and should a condition about drainage be one of the ones that's really being appealed, we can point back to this finding of fact in these statements here. We weren't sure at the time, and therefore, the risk, and there's some risk because we're not sure, but that risk can be controlled and mitigated through conditions to the comprehensive permit, which, show up further on down in the permit. I don't know what those conditions are off the top of my head. I'm sure we could go down here and find a bunch of conditions that relate to drainage. But that's really the intention there is
Okay.
there's some risk, and we're going to do what we can with conditions to address that. And then, and I think what Steve said is an excellent point. You're right. There was a whole new plan, and I thought there was a couple of basins eliminated, or maybe some removed, but I think there was a lot that went. It was a much different plan than what was originally done.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? And I guess there's nobody in the public that's trying to speak. Katrina, are you aware of anyone who wants to speak or say anything for or against?
No, I haven't. There's nobody here raising their hand or anybody else that's dialed in.
Yep, okay.
Mr. Chairman?
All right. Yes, Mr. Hill.
If I could just ask a couple quick questions to
Absolutely.
Jeff Walsh. Since stormwater has come up tonight, I just maybe clarify a couple of points. The current drainage system was reviewed by you last year, is that right?
That's correct.
And when you reviewed it, did the applicant provide you with updated soil tests and groundwater levels in the areas of all the infiltration basins, to testing that's been done, recently?
Yes, at the beginning of that process, Dan, the new engineer at the time, Andrews Survey and Engineering, I did go out and witness soil testing with their engineer at these new basins.
All right, so for all the new basins, we've got reliable soil tests and groundwater levels that basically form the basis for the hydrology calculations. And
That is correct.
Is the stormwater report 100?
I'm sorry?
Is the stormwater report based upon the 10-year, 25, and 100-year storms? Is it all on all the storms?
210 and definitely 100, and I forget if the 25 was in there. I was looking at it this afternoon and I don't remember. Steve O'Connell. Give me a second. I got it nearby.
I'm just trying to get to the.
But yes, it meets the.
I was just trying to get to the point that.
DEP, and the DEP requires 210 and 100.
Okay, so you looked at this from the perspective of complying with the state stormwater standards?
I did.
Okay.
And yes, there is a 25-year storm that was also run.
And then if there is a problem, because I think the point that we were trying to make in that finding was that stormwater modeling is based upon assumptions, and it's not an exact science, and you know, it's not perfect. So if there was a problem and the drainage system is maybe too small, or maybe the soils are not as don't have the same infiltration capacity as we thought they did, isn't there an outflow that then goes into a pipe that's going to be under Main Street and over to the elementary school, so that we wouldn't actually have flooding on any properties on Main Street?
You're right that the drainage systems, the impoundments do have overflows, and the overflows for one of the basins does go down to Main Street, which will be the new drain line that will run down to the school and tie into the drainage system down by the elementary school. The other overflow goes to the brook. And by the way, the brook on the west side of this site, its overflow is going to be going into Main Street as well. The whole design of that overflow is to continue putting base flow across Main Street in the brook to maintain the normal stream flows. But any flooding conditions that were the result of heavy flows coming down the brook is going to be an overflow structure in Main Street that will divert the water through this new drain pipe rather than through the substandard brook system that runs behind the houses across the street of Main Street.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions or thoughts from anyone on the board? Anyone? So a couple of things I think that we're looking for additional input from the applicant. One would be the updated traffic study. Another one would be, you know, an explanation as to the economics here. Why can't you build the original project? Why do we need to add the units that are being requested here? You know, I probably should circle back to Mr. Walsh. I mean, you know, I know that Steve mentioned having addressed a few things in your letter. I didn't actually go through. Has the applicant addressed everything in your letter at this point, Jeff, or is there some outstanding issues there? And maybe that question is to both Steve and Jeff at this point.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I'll go through my letter. Number one, it just reiterates what I saw in the plans, and it agrees with SEB's correspondence to the board. Number two, yes, I reviewed the hydrology. Number three, yes, I reviewed for compliance with the DEP stormwater management requirements, and they need to address the 10-year storm, which was recognized by Mr. O'Connell earlier this evening. Number four, the buildings are 15 feet apart. I know with other 40Bs, we've been concerned about the buildings. I compared back to the plans that were circulated and approved a year ago, and there was 16 to 17 feet of separation. But there's a condition in the comprehensive permit that called for at least 15 feet. But nevertheless, I felt it worthy to bring up this issue and just, you know, I didn't think I needed to remind the board, but nevertheless, I did. That if not already done, you may want to circulate this with the town departments. I was thinking specifically the fire department and maybe the building inspector. Number five, length of unit driveways were 22 feet. That's just letting you know, hey, I checked and they're good. The amended bus shelter was addressed earlier this evening. I'm sorry, the bus shelter and mailbox and so forth. Next was just another point of information, the increased number of parking spaces. And then finally, if the project's going to go forward with this amendment, I just wanted to remind everyone that where the buildings caused pipes, drainage pipes off that run between the buildings to be rerouted, we'll just need to see the design information if it's going to go forward. There's no question that the drainage can work. That's not an issue. It's just information for the contractor. And the other piece of information that was on the last iteration of plans that were approved about a year ago was the fact that the affordable units were highlighted. And I just thought I'd bring it to everyone's attention that if that information so desired, which I believe it probably is, it'll need to get onto the plans.
Yeah, I think we definitely, at some point are going to want the affordables identified. And I think, a matrix breaking down the unit type as well, whether it's an A unit, a B unit, a C unit, and uphill, downhill, just so we know we've got a good mix of the affordable units. So if you could provide some sort of a matrix with that information, and I apologize if it's already here, but I don't think it is. Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. As we get ready to wrap up for this evening, we need to be thinking about when we want to continue. So we'll start with, to Mr. O'Connell or Mr. Engler. I mean, how much time do you think you want before we get together again?
I don't think realistically we'll have the traffic done in 2 weeks. I'd like to think we did, but probably 4 weeks. That will allow us just to reiterate traffic. We're going to submit 2 budgets. We'll submit the budget as approved, and then budget as proposed. Does that satisfy, Bill, what you're asking for? So you can see the delta?
I think so. What do you think, Dan? Would that be the normal thing in this situation? I don't know.
Well, when you say the budget is approved, you mean the current cost estimate for the 72-unit project as if you were building it in 2020, right?
Yes, the 72-unit plan, and then in 2020, and the 100-unit plan in 2020.
Yep.
Okay,
that's right.
So we'll submit those 2 budgets. We'll submit a site plan highlighting the affordable units. We'll submit a unit matrix that'll lay out all the units by type and size and style. So I think those, and then the traffic study we already said. So I think those are the primary requests. Do I have that about right?
I think so. I realize I did not necessarily. Go ahead, Dan. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to elaborate a little bit on the traffic information, and just my recommendation would be that the board ask for the speed study, which would provide the board with both the current speeds on Main Street in the location of the intersection, as well as the counts. So just to be clear that's something that we would, I think, want to see. And then with respect to site distances, I mean, what we normally get is a site distance triangle at the intersection where the applicant would actually go out in the field and measure the available site distances in both directions, and then plot that on a plan. Sometimes when I've asked for this information in the past in other communities, we don't actually get all that information. So I think that's what the board should be asking for. That's what we should be getting.
Okay, we got it. Steve knows what that is, and we'll work with our traffic engineer and get that plotted on a plan.
I just want to caution everybody that, Mass DOT is not accepting counts during COVID. They have laid out some guidelines on some adjustment factors that can be applied. We'll do the counts because they're easy and they're cheap, but I just want to, to caution everybody that the counts, will be reflective of the pandemic situation we're in. But nonetheless, it will be a data point, like Dan said, and there will be some DOT adjustment factors baked in, but the information will all be there. And I think the important part about this traffic study probably isn't so much the counts right now. There are some record counts available from DOT because this is a state numbered route, but I think trip generation from 72 to 100 units, current site distance, current projections on level of service for intersection analysis, et cetera. But again, we'll include the counts. I just wanted to caveat that.
Yeah, in intersection analysis, and that would apply to any other nearby intersection, not just the project intersection. So I don't know this neighborhood that well, so I'm not sure if there's a major intersection near this project, but if there is, that should be updated as well.
Okay.
Okay. So I was just looking through the comments we received from school department, Board of Health, police, DPW. Generally speaking, it's kind of a no comment situation. We all have copies of those and they're all available on the town website, right, Katrina?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. So I don't think we need to, I don't know if anyone wants to discuss any of those comments, but they're generally no comments. I thought I saw something from you, Katrina, from the fire department, but we don't have anything in writing.
So Steve called, and I spoke to him yesterday on Tuesday. His only concern was the width of the road and the original decision. So it's 24 feet width at the entrance, 22 feet at its narrowest up in the upper loop. And he said he's still fine with that because it maintained that on the revised plans. And he had no other issue or any problem with anything else in the plans.
Okay. We want to get that in the meeting minutes that you had that conversation.
Okay.
It would be nice if we can get it in writing, but I understand the issues right now with the fire department, so I'm not going to push that.
Okay.
So 4 weeks out gets us to, where are we? Today's the 24th, so it gets us into late October, like
October
the
29th.
Or, 4 weeks would be the 22nd.
22nd.
5 weeks would be the 29th. Anybody have any preference or?
Do you have other applications you have to hold hearings for? Because I don't think the traffic is going to take that long. I just think we want to buffer in some time for a review of it, which I'm not sure how we'll handle that. I think it's going to be self-explanatory, but if you do want to have some time, at least for Jeff to do a review, we want to buffer that in. I don't think we need a lot of time to actually produce the traffic analysis.
Yeah, no, I think we definitely want Jeff to review it. And, I think Jeff would be appropriate to review it, right? I mean, I know in other situations we brought in other traffic consultants, but, I think maybe you start with a review by you, Jeff, and then if it looks like something that needs to go to a traffic professional or something, we can cross that bridge when we get there. Does that make sense?
That works for me. I'm comfortable looking at the more simpler things. Sight lines I have no trouble with whatsoever. And reading the traffic reports and so forth, yes. And I'll alert you if I feel I'm getting over my head.
Thank you. I think we should go for the 22nd. That'd be 4 weeks out. Does that seem reasonable to everybody?
Yep.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, do you know when the town meeting meets? I think it's around the same time, right?
Town meeting is, I believe, it's either going to be the 12th or the 19th, because I think it's the second or third Monday.
Third Monday, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so that shouldn't interfere even if it goes to another night. It should not be a problem. Then let's go with the 22nd. Just really quickly, just check, make sure there's no other people trying to say anything. Okay. So at this point, I'd entertain a motion to, hang on a second. Yeah, so I entertain a motion to continue case number 754 to October 22nd at 7 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
So motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? And we'll do a roll call vote with the four permanent members. Mr. Yeomans, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Reed?
Yes.
Mr. Waller?
Yes.
Chairman votes yes. So we'll see you all on the 22nd at 7 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
All right. So, Katrina, did you ever receive anything from our town administrator about this? Give him the right to. All right. So I'm not comfortable. So, actually, Katrina, why don't you explain to the board? Did we lose Kay?
I guess I'll text her to have her come back.
No, don't worry about it. Doesn't
Okay.
matter.
We lost both of them. We lost two of them.
Yeah, we lost Brian too.
Yeah.
They didn't realize we weren't done. So the long and the short of it, the interim town administrator wanted the board to discuss and vote having him sign my town warrants. Now, mind you, Tim and the assistant town administrator, whoever had been in that position, has the ability, because technically they are my department head, to sign my bills.
Kay's back.
He wanted you guys to vote on it, but he didn't give me any wording on what he once said. And I've sent him 2 emails this week. And I've gotten no response.
All right. I'm not comfortable voting on something I don't even know what I'm voting on.
I know. And I asked him.
Yeah, and especially something like this. For all we know, we're giving him, permission to go ahead and, bill for the town coffers, in the name of the ZBA. And I'm sure that's not the case, but, something like that. I really would like to have something in writing that this is what we need to do, and then we can, I'm sure we'd be more than happy to do it, but I really would like to see something in writing.
I will try and pin him down next time he's in to see if he can give me something that he wants done.
Okay. Any cases outstanding?
No, nothing's come in.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to table the minutes. It's late and we've lost a couple of members, so I'd like to table the minutes. One thing that is kind of popped up and occurred to me today as we were contemplating whether we could even have this meeting because the government access wasn't working is whether we should even have that as part of what we're doing here. And I know that I think I pushed a little bit at the beginning. I really wanted to make sure that people could get here, get to these meetings. So to have it available as many ways as possible was important to me. But if there's a risk that we can't hold a meeting because something technologically went wrong and we can't get onto the government access channel, that makes me a little nervous. And I don't know. I mean, it sounds like we learned today was actually the problem was user error, I guess.
It's me. I hit a button up here by me.
And we won't do that again. So
Nope.
Maybe we just continue the way we're going.
So I will tell you this, especially with tonight's hearing. And Bill, you'll remember this because I came in at I started working for the ZBA, the second or third hearing on Fisherville. Bernie Gardzina was the only one who called. He's like, I don't have a computer. I don't have Zoom. I can't call in. And he was going to watch it. So I will tell you this, people are watching it when we are live. So they do have an idea of what's going on, just to give you that. If it helps. I don't know if it does.
I wonder why he wouldn't use the phone to call in.
I told him he can. He said he didn't feel comfortable about it. He did call and ask what the changes were. I told him if he wanted to come up here and talk to me, I would show him everything. And he was fine. Okay. His biggest concern was, is the drainage still going to get fixed? I said, it's still part of the comprehensive permit. And as far as we were concerned, yes.
Yep. Okay. All right. Because he was at every single meeting. I was really surprised to not see him online. I actually was wondering if he's okay. So
no, he's
I'm
fine.
glad to hear he's okay. And, but okay. All right.
What question?
Yes, Mr. Yeomans.
Will the fifth member be Mary Ann or one of the alternates?
We'll cross that bridge when we get there, but we still have the, whatever that rule is.
The Mullen rule.
Mullins rule.
Yeah. So she can ask for a mulligan and, I think continue to be voting. But, yeah, good question, Bill. hopefully this doesn't go too many more meetings. So we do have the 2 alternates. So, we have enough people to vote. But, I think if Marianne wants to do the Mullen thing, she's entitled to do that. And then we'd be eligible to vote.
Also, I wanted to give you guys an update. Bill knows and Dan knows, Mr. Hignorani is going before the planning board October 5th for the subdivision acceptance. So I don't know if you guys want to watch that meeting or not, but he will be there.
I'll actually be a participant in that meeting.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. I will make sure Chris includes you, guys. I did tell him to include you, but I will double check with that.
No, I think I got it. But yeah, feel free to double check, but I think I got it.
Okay.
All right. Anything else from anyone? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Somebody say second, please.
Second. I was trying to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. We got to do it on roll call, so we'll just start. Mr. Parisi.
Parisi, aye.
Ms. Reed.
Yes.
Mr. Yeomans.
Yeomans, yes.
Mr. Seith.
Seat, yes.
Chairman votes yes. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good night.